I knew something was wrong the moment Claire locked our bedroom door for the first time. It wasn't a casual click or a moment of privacy. It was deliberate, tense, like she was sealing away a part of herself she was terrified I might see. We had been married for 7 years, and not once had either of us locked the door to the room we shared. Hearing that sharp metallic snap felt like something inside me cracked too. I stood in the hallway staring at the doorknob, unable to understand how a simple lock could suddenly feel like a wedge hammered right between us. At first, I tried to be understanding, telling myself she was stressed or exhausted from work. Claire was a nurse, and her shifts often left her drained in a way that made even simple tasks feel monumental. When she said she needed a few nights alone and moved into the guest bedroom, I swallowed my confusion and let her have the space she asked for. I told myself it was temporary, that she'd explain, eventually, that marriages had phases. But the explanation never came, and the space stopped feeling temporary. It felt intentional. The strangest part was how drastically her behavior changed within just a couple of weeks. Claire became guarded in a way I had never seen, always turning her body away from me, clutching her phone like she was afraid it might explode, avoiding my gaze like eye contact was dangerous. Conversations that once flowed easily between us died in her throat before they could begin. She'd mumble short answers, force small smiles, then drift away from me physically and emotionally like I was a stranger intruding in her home. Each day I woke hoping things would return to normal, and each night I went to bed feeling more like I was losing her. Friends tried to reassure me at first, telling me Claire was probably overwhelmed or going through some personal stress she didn't know how to talk about. But even they started shifting uncomfortably when I mentioned the locked door. Maybe she just needs a quiet place to decompress, my friend Jordan suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. My sister thought it was a sign Claire might be preparing to leave me, and the thought made my stomach twist. No one had a solid answer, and the more theories I heard, the more fear crept into my mind. It was like watching a storm cloud gather inside my house, one I couldn't escape. Then the noises started soft at first, barely noticeable, but enough to make uncertainty evolve into dread. One night, while passing the locked bedroom door, I heard faint humming, slow and rhythmic, like Claire was trying to soothe herself. Another night, I heard something like scraping or shifting furniture, followed by a heavy sigh. I pressed my ear to the door, and the wood felt cold against my cheek, amplifying every sound. When I asked her about it in the morning, she looked startled and said she didn't remember making any noise, but her answer was far too quick and forced to be the truth. It was the first time I realized she wasn't just hiding something, she was lying. As the weeks passed, the lies grew thicker, stacking on top of each other until they felt like walls closing me out. She'd come home late, claiming extra shifts, but I'd find no record of them on her schedule. Receipts disappeared, drawers were rearranged, and she started keeping a small key on a necklace she tucked beneath her shirt. The symbolism didn't escape me. It felt like she wore the lock between us around her neck like a shield, a reminder that she held control over a truth I wasn't allowed to know. Every time I saw that chain glint beneath her collar, something inside me tightened. One night, after weeks of keeping my worries to myself, I finally reached a breaking point. I knocked on the locked bedroom door softly at first, then with urgency when she didn't answer. "Claire, please," I said through the wood, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to understand what's happening." For a moment, I thought she would ignore me again. But then, I heard her footsteps approach, hesitant and dragging, like she was carrying a weight too heavy for one person. She didn't open the door, but she placed her hand on the other side. I could feel the faint pressure through the wood. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't let you see. Not yet." Her words didn't comfort me, they terrified me. She sounded scared, not angry or defensive, and that made everything worse. What could possibly be so devastating she couldn't show me? Why had she chosen secrecy over partnership? My mind began forming answers I didn't want to consider, each one darker than the last. And yet, nothing prepared me for what I heard next. Late one night, as I walked past our locked bedroom on my way to the kitchen, I heard Claire's voice again, but this time, it wasn't humming or sighing. She was crying and whispering to someone. I froze outside the locked bedroom door, listening to the faint sound of Claire's voice shaking as she whispered to someone I couldn't hear. The terror hit me so quickly it made my arms go numb, and for a moment, All I could do was press my hand flat against the doorframe to stay upright. I told myself it had to be a phone call, that she wasn't literally speaking to someone inside the room. But the way her voice dipped into a hushed, trembling cadence didn't sound like a phone conversation. It sounded like she was soothing or pleading with someone. I backed down the hallway slowly, my mind spiraling into dark possibilities I wasn't ready to face. The next morning, Claire acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, hummed softly, and moved around the kitchen with the same mechanical grace she'd developed over the last couple months. I watched her carefully, trying to catch even a flicker of guilt or hesitation, but she kept her expression perfectly neutral. When I asked if she was okay, she answered too quickly again. "I'm fine, Daniel, just tired." The same tired excuse she'd used every day since the door first locked. We were living side by side, but every day she felt further away. It was like waking up next to a ghost wearing my wife's skin. The fear inside me didn't fade. It grew roots. I found myself studying her routines more closely, noticing how she always checked the hallway before approaching the locked room, how she would stand with her back pressed against it as if shielding it from view. She had started keeping her phone on silent, flipped face down, and she never left it unattended anymore. Even the way she spoke changed. Conversations were clipped, emotionally flat, like she was deliberately editing her words before they left her mouth. It left me feeling unsteady, constantly wondering what truth she was swallowing instead of telling me. I tried confronting her gently one night while she was sitting at the dining table, sorting through mail. My voice barely came out, more breath than words. "Claire, please talk to me. You're scaring me." Her hands paused mid-motion, a stack of envelopes trembling between her fingers. For a moment, I thought she'd finally open up, that the exhaustion on her face meant she was ready to release whatever she'd been carrying alone. But then her jaw tightened, and she forced a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I said I'm fine," she murmured. "You just need to trust me." It felt like being asked to walk blindfolded across a bridge I could already hear cracking. My anxiety grew worse once I started discovering little oddities around the house. A missing blanket from the closet. A bottle of antiseptic that vanished from the bathroom cabinet. Claire's laptop, once always open and accessible on the kitchen counter, now locked with a new password I didn't know. And most unsettling of all was the steady disappearance of small household items. Scissors, tape, batteries, a humidifier, even a box of protein bars. None of it made sense. It was as if she were gathering supplies for something she didn't want me connected to. Then there were the sounds, faint, eerie, and wholly unexplainable. Soft scraping, like a chair being dragged. A rhythmic tapping, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Once, I heard Claire talking in a gentle sing-song tone, words too muffled to make out, but the cadence was unmistakably soothing. I pressed my ear to the door, and the wood vibrated faintly beneath my cheek. When I stepped away, my entire body felt cold. No theory, no matter how extreme, felt unreasonable anymore. My imagination painted pictures I didn't want to see. The turning point came on a Friday evening when Claire came home later than usual. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying in the car before coming inside. She tried to slip past me with a muttered, "Long shift." But something in her voice held too much strain. So when she headed straight for her purse, I followed. I didn't plan the next moment, it was instinctual, a desperate attempt to find the truth. As she went to hang her coat, I opened her car door and began looking through the back seat. What I found made my stomach flip. Hidden beneath a folded blanket was a large receipt from a medical supply store, one listing items that set off every alarm bell in my mind. A hospital-grade pump, sterile gloves, a neonatal monitoring kit, and a crib, an expensive one, ordered just 2 weeks earlier. My throat tightened as I stared at the total, my brain scrambling to translate the meaning of what I was seeing. Claire hadn't told me she bought any of this. She hadn't told me anything at all. And suddenly, the locked door wasn't just a mystery. It was a threat, one I could no longer pretend wasn't there. I waited until Claire stepped into the shower before walking straight toward the locked bedroom door. My hands were shaking so badly I had to wipe them against my jeans just to get a grip on the doorknob. I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing this. Every moral line in my head was screaming at me to stop, but fear has a way of burning through hesitation. I grabbed the spare house keys from the drawer, the ones we never used, and tried each one with a pounding heart. None fit. My pulse hammered harder with every failed attempt, until finally I had to lean my forehead against the door just to steady my breath. That was when I heard it. A small sound, fragile and high-pitched, impossible to mistake. A whimper, soft, wavering, undeniably human. My entire body locked up in shock as the truth slammed into me so suddenly I nearly lost my balance. There was someone in there. Someone vulnerable. Someone Claire had been keeping hidden from me. I staggered back, my pulse roaring in my ears, the world tilting like the floor had disappeared beneath me. When Claire stepped out of the shower minutes later, hair damp and wrapped in a towel, she wasn't expecting to find me standing in the hallway waiting for her. The moment she saw my face, she froze. Her eyes darted to the door behind me, then back to me, panic rising so quickly it distorted her expression. I didn't yell, I didn't have the breath to. Instead, I held up the receipt from her car, the one that listed neonatal supplies, and asked quietly, "Claire, who is in that room?" Her knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the wall as if she might collapse. She didn't answer, at least not with words. Tears started falling fast, silent and uncontrolled, and she shook her head like a child refusing medicine. "Daniel, please, you don't understand," she whispered, voice cracking in the middle. But I didn't look away this time. I let the question hang in the air between us, heavier than anything we'd ever faced in our marriage. When I reached for the doorknob, Claire grabbed my wrist with surprising force. "Stop!" she cried, her voice sharp enough to echo off the walls. She was trembling so violently that I could feel the shivers through her grip. "If you open it, everything changes. Everything." Her words were desperate, but behind them was something else. Fear, yes, but also a buried guilt. I felt it like a second pulse in the air. I pulled my wrist free, my voice low. It already changed. Claire covered her face with both hands, breathing in ragged gasps. For a moment, I thought she might run straight out the front door. Instead, she whispered something so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I was going to tell you. I swear I was. I just needed time." My heart lurched painfully, not because I believed her, but because part of me wanted to, wanted there to be any explanation other than the worst ones flooding my mind. I gestured to the door. "Then tell me right now. No more lies." Her hands dropped slowly from her face, and for the first time in months, she looked directly at me, not through me, not past me, but with eyes wide open and full of fear. "Promise me you won't be angry," she whispered. I shook my head. "I can't promise that, but I'll listen." Something in her expression shifted, a surrender, a silent acceptance that the secret she'd been protecting had finally grown too heavy to hold. With trembling fingers, she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a key. The sound of the lock turning felt impossibly loud, like a gunshot in a silent room. Claire pushed the door open just a few inches at first, as if shielding me from whatever waited inside. A cold rush of air drifted out, carrying a faint scent of baby powder and something else, anxiety, maybe, or months of fear compressed into a single breath. Slowly, she opened the door wider. My heart thudded painfully as I stepped into the room I hadn't seen in nearly half a year. Then I saw the crib, then the movement inside it, then the tiny face lifting from the blanket with a soft, confused noise. And in that split second, before Claire said a single word, before my brain could assemble the pieces, I realized with bone-deep certainty that this was not a stranger. This was a baby, and he looked exactly like me. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mind felt frozen, like the world had slipped underwater and every sound came muffled and slow. The baby blinked up at me with wide, curious eyes, my eyes, the same deep brown, the same little crease beneath the left one that my mother always said made me look like I was already laughing. I stepped closer, instinctively, almost in a trance, and my hand hovered over the crib as if pulled by a magnet I didn't know existed. Claire stood behind me, her breathing shallow and uneven. She wasn't crying anymore. She was watching me, studying every twitch of my face like the outcome of my reaction might decide her fate. "His name is Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling around the syllables. "He's 4 months old." Her words weren't shocking because of what they were, but because of the unbearable truth buried inside them. 4 months. That meant for the entire time she'd locked this room. She'd been hiding him, our son, from me. I turned toward her slowly, still unable to fully process the sheer weight of what I had walked into. You had my child, and you didn't tell me? My voice cracked in the middle, the pain raw and unfiltered. Claire collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands again. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she choked out. I was trying to protect him. That stopped me cold. Protect him? From what? Or from whom? Claire looked up, her eyes red but steady. Daniel, there was a reason I didn't tell you. A reason I kept the door locked. I thought I honestly believed you wouldn't want him. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. It felt like she'd hit me with something heavy and sharp right in the center of my chest. Why on earth would you think that? I managed to ask. Claire swallowed hard, tears gathering again at the corners of her eyes. Because of what happened with your father. A thick lump formed in my throat as memories surged violently, memories I spent years burying. I could still hear my father's voice, cold and dismissive, telling me I was his biggest mistake. I could still feel the sting of knowing he never once celebrated a birthday with me, never attended a school event, never cared. Claire had been there through much of it, back when we were dating. She'd seen how deeply it cut me, how determined I was to never become him. But still keeping my child from me? It didn't make sense. Not enough sense. I sank onto the opposite side of the bed, leaving a wide gulf between us. Claire, you should have told me anyway. My voice came out quieter than I intended, almost fragile. You don't get to make that decision for me. Claire nodded, wiping her cheeks. I know I messed up. But the day I found out I was pregnant, you were in the middle of the worst anxiety spiral I'd ever seen. You could barely get out of bed, Daniel. You didn't even notice I'd gone to the doctor alone. She wasn't wrong. Those had been brutal months. My job, my health, my mind, they were unraveling all at once. But hiding a baby? That was an entirely different kind of decision. Claire clasped her hands together, knuckles white. I told myself I'd wait until things were stable between us. Then until the pregnancy was viable. Then until he was born. And then I just kept waiting. Every day I thought, tomorrow I'll tell him. But every day you seemed better, calmer, happier than before. I got scared I'd ruin your progress. Her confession hung thick in the air, heavy with both fear and regret. I didn't know whether to scream or to weep. I stood and walked back to the crib. Leo's tiny hand reached toward me, fingers curling around nothing, searching. Without thinking, I let him grab my finger. His grip was soft, but surprisingly strong. That single touch nearly brought me to my knees. This small, fragile life had been kept from me not by malice, but by fear. Not by betrayal, but by a terrible, misguided attempt at protection. I turned to Claire again, my voice steady but charged with emotion. I deserved to know. He deserved to know me. Claire nodded, tears falling again, her whole body shaking with the weight of what she'd hidden. I know, she whispered, and I'll do anything to fix this. Anything. But before I could answer, Leo let out a sudden, sharp cry, a sound that cut through the tension like a blade. Claire rushed forward to pick him up, but I held out a hand to stop her. Let me, I said quietly, and for the first time, I held my son. Leo settled in my arms with a soft whimper, his tiny head nuzzling into my shoulder like he'd been meant to fit there all along. The weight of him was so small, yet somehow it grounded me more than anything had in years. I rocked gently, more instinct than intention, and his cries softened until they faded altogether. Claire watched from a few feet away, her hands trembling, her face etched with guilt so deep it seemed carved into her skin. For the first time since stepping into that locked room, the silence didn't feel like a threat, it felt like a turning point. Holding Leo forced everything into focus. Every fear, every memory, every decision that had brought us here aligned like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know I'd been trying to solve. My father had abandoned me emotionally long before he vanished physically. and the shadow of that abandonment had shaped too much of my life. I had spent so long trying to outrun the possibility of becoming him that I didn't realize I'd buried myself under the same fear he once used to justify his neglect. But the moment I breathed in the soft, powdery scent of my son's hair, something inside me cracked wide open, releasing years of pressure I didn't need to carry anymore. Claire stepped closer, wringing her hands, but she didn't dare touch me, or Leo. "I know you probably hate me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And I don't blame you. I kept something you never should have been kept from. I can't even imagine what you're thinking." Her eyes shone with the kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen in years, and for a moment, she looked less like the woman who locked a door, and more like the woman I fell in love with, the one who always feared hurting the people she cared about. I exhaled slowly, bouncing Leo gently as he drifted half asleep against my chest. "I don't hate you," I said, the words surprising even me. "I'm hurt. I'm angry. But hate isn't the word." Claire's shoulders sagged with relief, though she didn't look any less shattered. "I want to make this right," she said. "I want us to be a family. A real one. No more hiding. No more fear." And although I knew forgiveness wouldn't come instantly, her sincerity wasn't something I could ignore. I motioned toward the rocker beside the crib, and she sat slowly, watching me as though I might disappear if she blinked too long. "You should have trusted me," I said, my tone steady but firm. "Not because I'm perfect. Not because I've never struggled. But because we promised we'd face things together." Claire nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks again. "I thought I was sparing you from becoming your father," she whispered. "I thought, if you didn't know until you were stable, it would protect you." Hearing her say it out loud didn't make the wound smaller, but it did make the intention clearer. After a long pause, she added, "The room, locking it. I knew it was wrong. Every time I heard you jiggle the doorknob, I panicked. I thought telling you at the wrong time would break you. I didn't realize that hiding it would break us instead." Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth to keep a sob from escaping. I sat beside her, still holding Leo, and for the first time in months, the physical distance between us felt like something we could actually close. Weeks passed after that night, and each day was its own kind of healing. I attended every pediatric appointment, every 3 a.m. feeding shift, every small moment I'd missed. The first time Leo smiled at me, a real smile. Not just gas, I cried harder than I expected. Claire and I talked more in those weeks than we had in the previous year. It wasn't perfect. Some conversations reopened wounds. Some nights ended in quiet tension. But for the first time, everything was out in the open, and that transparency was its own form of peace. Claire apologized every day at first, then gradually learned to apologize less and show effort more. She gave me full access to every decision involving Leo: medical, financial, future plans. She even suggested going to couples therapy, something she'd once sworn she'd never do. And slowly, cautiously, I let myself start imagining a future that didn't end with running away from my past. One night, about 2 months after the door opened, she came to me holding a small wooden box. "I want you to have this," she said. Inside was a new house key, this one engraved. It read, "No more locked doors." I stared at it for a long time, the weight of those 4 words hitting me harder than she probably realized. It was a promise, a confession, and a plea all at once. I looked at Claire, then at Leo sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside our bed. "Then let's build something where no one ever needs to hide again," I said softly. And for the first time in a long time, Claire reached for my hand, not out of fear, but out of hope.